Thank you so much for joining ADHD Time on Air. We're going to be talking about a book that I read with my book club and we all enjoyed very much. It is called It All Makes Sense Now. Okay, of course, you can't see it because of my screen, but I really very much enjoyed the book and I'm so happy to talk with Meredith. And how about you introduce yourself and your book?
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me on. I'm really excited to get a chance to chat with you. As you mentioned, my name is Meredith. I live in the Phoenix, Arizona area. I'm an ADHD coach, creator, and author. I started working in this space about 7 years ago when I was really deep diving into trying to learn about ADHD because my daughter had been diagnosed. And I have that kind of common story of being diagnosed right after my child. I wrote this book because when I was in that period of like really seeking information, I was finding some really good books that were really giving me a lot of clinical information about ADHD. I was learning a lot about executive functions and all of those things, but I felt like I couldn't find that book that talked to the lived experience of learning you had ADHD and how it's kind of impacted you outside of those very specific symptoms. So I wanted a book that, one, provided actual information and strategies for people, but also spoke to what it's like to live with this.
And that book definitely does that. You, in the book, talked about the challenges of motivation and abandoning goals. So the first thought that came to me is like, how did you do the book writing, having ADHD? So tell us a bit about how you overcame the abandoning goals and the motivation challenges yourself while writing this book.
I think that for me, if I had tried to write a book prior to my diagnosis, it wouldn't have happened. I actually wanted to be an author my whole life. I love to write. I got really good feedback from teachers, but I just didn't understand the world of writing. I didn't know how to make a career of it. So I kind of put that aside. It seemed too big for me. And again, I had ADHD and didn't understand the symptoms I was dealing with. So when I decided to write this book, I really made decisions carefully with how I went about it with ADHD in mind. So I decided to work with a traditional publisher versus a self-publisher because I knew I needed external deadlines. I knew I needed someone telling me, we need your manuscript by this date. We need your edits by this date, because then it would just kind of make me have that urgency to be motivated to do it. I also gave a answer that was a little unexpected to my editor when she asked me how long I needed to write my manuscript after they had made an offer. And I said 3 months. And she was absolutely shocked by that answer. She said most authors need 6 to 9 months to write a book. But the way I looked at it, and I had been thinking about it a while because I knew that question was coming, I knew that I was going to write this book in 3 months no matter what. I would procrastinate if they gave me 6 months, and it would just be this thing hanging over my head, and I'd probably not really want to do it by the time it was time to start, or, I had the motivation to start writing. So I knew I needed that kind of sense of urgency. I also didn't want to I don't like the word drag it out because I really do enjoy writing, but I knew if I had too much time, I did risk getting bored with the process. So I made those decisions really carefully along the way. I also made a lot of careful decisions about what I committed to during the promotional process of getting the book out there. I actually found all of that much harder than the actual writing of.
That's amazing. I talk so many times with my clients about thinking about the year as like seasons. Like this is the season of writing a book, like fall season, but so it seemed like you did the same kind of strategy. You gave yourself a season and you didn't give yourself a year. You didn't give yourself unlimited time. You kind of narrowed it to a very narrow, but also I hear a component of reflection and planning and keeping that goal achievable because of that, which I really
Yes.
much appreciate.
Yeah, I absolutely looked at too, like when you mentioned seasons, that's exactly what it was. I had to put things on hold. I didn't take new clients during that time. I put other projects aside because I knew it needed to be the primary focus because I didn't want to be burned out. And I feel like if I had spread that out over a longer period of time, that could have happened.
Yeah, I know this baby now is celebrating its 1 year birthday. And now that it's officially a toddler, do you have any insights of things you might have done different or things you wish were in the book or things that you regret putting in the book? Any thoughts now that it's celebrating a year?
I don't know that I have any regrets about what I didn't put in the book because I feel like that's going to go in the next book, right? I do feel like I was surprised at times with what resonated with people, with the kind of the emails I got, the messages I've received from people. It was really, I think, interesting because it wasn't always what I thought would be, someone's favorite chapter or favorite tidbit from the book.
Yeah. So when we create something and send it out to the world, it might be interpreted in a different way. And some of the interpretations surprised you. What was the most surprising interpretation?
I think that I was surprised how many people really related to the chapter on perfectionism and
Mhm.
ADHD. That one seemed to really hit people in a very emotional way. I think perfectionism in my world, I feel like I've been talking about it for so long. I'm, surrounded by other thought leaders that talk about perfectionism. But it really felt like for a lot of people, they hadn't really noticed that that was something that behavior that they had adopted and a behavior that was destructive for them.
Yeah. It's a personal challenge, so I very much relate. And I had one of my readers in my book club also emphasize that chapter. One of the comments that they did share is that you share personal stories together with scientific information, and that you don't get into too many details, but then you also expose a little bit, and that is the balancing act that's not easy. And what my friends were really curious about that balancing act. How did you feel about it? What was the biggest challenge in creating that balancing act?
It was definitely a challenge because I really do like to nerd out on all the scientific information. But I had a conversation with my editor before I started writing, and I had written some sample chapters for her. And the feedback she gave me was, you really need to be thinking about who is your reader the whole time you're writing this book. And so we had identified my reader as someone that is kind of new-ish to ADHD. And by new, that doesn't necessarily mean they were late diagnosed, but they were new to really the learning process. So they may have seen videos online, they may have received a diagnosis. Their child might have ADHD. They're not brand new where they don't have any kind of like vocabulary around it. But they haven't read 8 books yet. They haven't worked in the field. Knowing that just because I really love the science piece and I really enjoy learning about that, that might not be what the reader actually needs for now. There's other books doing that. So I really wrote this book knowing that this is going to give someone I think, a really good overview and understanding of their brain, and then hopefully spark interest in exploring certain concepts that are introduced in the book versus making this like a scientific book, because I think there's a lot of really talented authors that are doing that already. Because I'm not a clinician, I'm not a doctor, I'm going to let those people do that, and I'm going to speak to what I understand better.
Yeah. One of my personal favorite quotes from the book is like at page 128, I think, and I'm going to rephrase this quote, but it was basically, we must first focus on cultivating compassion for our past self before we can make lasting change for future ourselves. And I think that theme kind of repeats again in the book, that understanding ourselves, but forgiving or letting go, and then also moving towards change. I know that is not an easy task. How do you personally do that? How do you do that cycle of forgiving, letting go, but also pushing towards change?
That's something that I think if you have access to therapy is really, really helpful to process with a trained provider. Unfortunately, not everybody has access to that. So I do feel like taking that time to reflect, understanding that all these things that you perceived as character flaws your whole life actually were driven by symptoms you didn't know you were experiencing. I think that's key. And I think really getting into spaces with people that have compassion can help you have more compassion for yourself too. But it's also one of those things that I think we need to also understand, it's not a linear process. We are not going to one day flip a switch and be really great at having compassion for ourselves. It's something that we have to walk ourselves back to time and time again. The more we do it, the better we get at it. Something I do in my membership community is we have a Friday meeting where everybody shares their win for the week. And it's not just about like those big wins. It's sometimes those littler things that we did, like maybe we had a light bulb moment, or maybe we just did a really boring task. And having a space like that that's supportive and reminds us to reflect and find the things we're doing well, find the things that we're proud of, really can help build that compassion for ourselves and really cultivate that skill.
Yeah. As I said, that I personally very much enjoyed the book, and my club members did. And one of their insights is that you like to talk a lot about making things visual. So, believe it or not, one of my club members counted how many times you said that. Um, so, the idea of visualizing your routines or your list or keeping it accessible is something that came up again and again. What in your life are you currently visualizing? And this was their question. What are you keeping accessible for yourself from all these strategies at the moment?
So are we talking like everyday things I do to keep things visible, or more on like a bigger scale in terms of goals, keeping goals visible? I could give you both answers if you want.
Go with both. Let's go with more.
Okay, so on a practical standpoint, I struggle a lot with my morning routine of just like physically getting ready for the day in terms of remembering what I've done. I'm that person that I could, take my supplements or medication and have the bottle in my hand and not really be sure if I took it or not. So I need to have systems set up so that things are done. I have in my bathroom 2 little bins, and I call them my before and after bins. And everything gets dumped into the before bin at the start, and it's got like my deodorant, it's got all my makeup, it's got everything that is, part of that, like in the bathroom getting ready. And so as I'm using the thing, I'm just putting it in the other bin. So I'm seeing that that thing's been done. And then I just dump it over and start over again the next day. And it's so, so simple. What I love about this is it's like all you really need to do is buy a couple of little baskets. And it works pretty well 95% of the time. There are still times when I've got my mascara in my hand and I'm like, oh, I did one eye and not the other. Like there's still going to be those moments. But I think it really helps to identify like the times in your life where your mind tends to wander and set up some systems to kind of like give you that visual check if something's been done or not.
Yeah, I do something similar when I'm baking. Everything I move one to the other side of the counter. If it made it to that side of the counter, it was put already in the recipe. Because when I'm baking, I'm always in my head instead of in my recipe.
Yeah, not to like go on a huge tangent, but I've never liked baking because I think it's so precise. And if you miss one step, it turns out badly. I'm a much better cook than a baker, but maybe with a strategy like that, I could be more successful. So thank you for pointing that out. I hadn't thought of it applying it in that context.
I have no choice. I have kids with allergies, so I became a baker out of necessity. So necessity is the mother of all inventions, right? So visualizing list was like, creating lists to have as a backup was one of the things you brought up. Like you talk a lot about like exploring your strategies and creating a bank of options, or like you talk a lot about making ideas, giving yourself these, like the bookends is an example that comes to mind. From those strategies, is there ones that you feel like, oh my God, that is one I can recommend to a parent? Like, because I get that one of my readers was a parent and they asked, like, from those things, is there something that you said, oh, that really changed my parenting?
So you mentioned the bookends. So that strategy for anyone that needs a refresher or hasn't read the book yet, I talk a lot about how important it is for people with ADHD to bookend their days with interest or curiosity or enjoyment in some way. And as a parent, I have really shown my kids how to do that. So my son, he is back to school now. And he is very motivated to get ready in the morning, even though he is not a morning person, because if we get out the door on time, he gets 20 minutes on the playground before the bell rings. He wants to be on the playground the second it's open and staffed, because he has noticed that when he runs around and has time with his friends, he has a better day. And then when I pick him up, we typically don't jump right into like, let's do homework, let's do all these other things. We usually spend some time doing something fun. And usually that involves a timer so that it doesn't like take over the whole rest of the day. But I found that that's helped a lot. It didn't always feel like what I wanted to do as a mom, especially the afternoon one, because I was just ready to have all my to-do lists done. I don't know if anybody relates to that feeling of like, oh, maybe I can rest once I've checked all these boxes off, and we're just trying to like get through the things that we hate the most, and helping my kids with homework is on that list of things I really don't enjoy doing. So, for a long time with my other children, I had been like, we get home from school and we start our homework immediately. And like, that is, we get it done, we don't let anything else interfere with that. And now that we've made that switch, I feel like my house is much more calm. It's a little bit happier. We do have to stay on top of like, remembering the homework's the thing and not get too wrapped up in those bookends. But it has helped a lot with just mood and everyday kind of like mental health in our house.
Yeah, that sounds like a great idea. And I loved the bookends. It led to a conversation at our dinner table. We were talking about the challenge of putting something in the morning when you have school and everyday routine. And my teenager said, okay, at least we can maybe put something on the weekends, which is a really good shift from all or nothing approach.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that I really tried to convey the message in the book that these are strategies and I'm going to outline them for you, but make them your own. And I think that's the coach in me because as coaches, especially ADHD coaches, we're looking at everything through an ADHD lens and we have all these strategies and tips and tricks and things that work. But we know that they work best when we allow the client to kind of come to the version of that makes the most sense for them. So that's so awesome that your son was able to be like, look, this just doesn't feel possible right now to do something in the morning, but like, let's think about our weekends differently. And that's a great implementation of that.
Thank you. The coach in me agrees with you. Another thing that I realized when I read the book were how ADHD friendly it was, how like chapters were short and like tasks were like, and I really appreciated that. And I do like the cover. I would like to say that out loud. And now is the part where I ask you, what's next? Both as an ADHD coach and a creator, what's the next steps?
Right now, I am working on a second book proposal. I don't have a contract yet, so I don't know if it will get out into the world anytime soon, but I am working on a book that is about ADHD and motherhood. So not necessarily a parenting book full of a billion tips and tricks to parent your ADHD child, but speaking to the experience of how ADHD affects you if you are parenting with ADHD.
Nice. That sounds really interesting. Let me know when it comes out. Is there anything else you want to share with our readers or anything you want to that I didn't ask that you want to share with us?
No, I'd love to thank everyone that's read the book. I love getting messages that something stuck out for you. If you did read the book and it made an impact, if you can leave a review on Amazon or Goodreads, that helps the book continue to be seen. So thank you to anyone that's read the book, that's shared it with a friend. It's really been amazing to see the support of the community.
Well, that's great, and do that. And thank you so much for joining us and for being on air with ADHD Time.
Thank you so much for having me.